Greetings. My name is Onyx Solbianco, and I wanted to take a moment to show to you these incredibly patriotic red, white, and blue curtains that are in the space that I currently find myself. Now listen, this isn't my space. It's only mine in the sense that I've been living in it, but it doesn't belong to me. I rather manifested this space and the generosity of the human being that is allowing me to stay in this space. However, the reason why I wanted to show you what it looks like is because the fact of me being vibrationally matched to such a patriotic spread is hysterical and so appropriate, and I'm going to explain why. I want to talk about belonging. I want to talk about belonging, and I want to talk about America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. I want to talk about this idea of home. Okay? So, full disclosure, as long as I can remember, I am not someone that has felt at home in this country and, truthfully, in this dimension and on this planet, right? This has been, like, the deepest wound of my life has been peeling back the layers on this in particular. And relative to being an American, I mean, I spent the majority of my younger adult life living in Europe, in the land of my roots, which is to say, Italy. I felt much more at home over there, and I thought to myself, why the hell did my ancestors ever leave this place? It's freaking great. Really, truly felt a deep, deep sense of home over there, you know? But, and also, it was interesting because while I was there, even though I had always thought of myself as being an Italian, and then also thought of myself as being a New Yorker, which, by the way, to me feels very different than saying I'm an American. I'm a New Yorker is a completely different concept than I'm an American. When I was over there, I felt more in touch with, how I'm a New Yorker, how I'm an Italian, but all the Italians were saying to me, oh, Americano, 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 right? So I was getting reflected to me the fact that I was an American while I was over there, which was so bizarre, because I was like, this isn't even a concept I've really truly related to my life, you know? And the reason why is because the things that I've associated with being an American, or with what it means to be patriotic, has been, frankly, baseball, which I've always found freaking boring. Having a gun, which hasn't really interested me very much. Being obnoxiously misogynistic and or someone that would be putting down the queer community. I belong to the queer community, so that's never resonated. These ideas of these gendered stereotypical ideas of what it means to be a man or a woman, and I'm someone that is trans in the sense that I've gone and lived and live a fluid experience of gender, so none of those things have resonated. Nothing. Like, I mean, granted, 4th of July has always been my favorite holiday simply because of the way in which my family would come together in the summer, and I'd have a lot of fun with that, but it wasn't because of any feelings of patriotism, is what I'm trying to say, you know? So, you could imagine my surprise then, when, by a synchronistic turn of events, I happened to be at my folks' place during the Democratic National Convention, and this is the only reason why I caught the Democratic National Convention, because generally speaking, I don't watch TV, but also I have no interest, or have had no interest, rather, in politics. And the thing of it is, just because it was on the television didn't mean that I needed to watch it, because I have no problem going and spending time sitting outdoors and being in nature. I'd rather do that than watch a television screen. But I genuinely felt compelled and drawn to watch and to witness this. With growing feelings of excitement and growing feelings of purpose and growing feelings of clarity relative to the work that I myself have been doing for years, with there finally being a kind of alignment with that work and what I was seeing reflected in the external, which is to say in the collective consciousness. Now, as an artist, as a musician, as someone who has delved incredibly deeply into psychology, and in particular Jungian psychology, who has spent a lot of time with the collective archetypes of the subconscious, And as a student of astrology, thus someone who has been deeply delving into for very many years myths and symbols as embodied by this system, I have been very attuned to what has been collectively beneath the level of consciousness. The fields within which I have been working and from which I have been pulling inspiration and from which I have been creating and with which I have been creating have up to this point have been beneath the level of collective consciousness. What this means is that I'm someone who, for example, I channeled the song Harmonious and Free in 2019 on the island of Maui. The sentiment of that song is so ripe in the collective consciousness right now in this moment, in that it's finally cool to be singing about harmony and freedom, even though, granted, this is something universal, so it's actually always cool, by my perception. But the collective consciousness up to this point has not been aligned with or attuned to those messages, even with them being universal. That doesn't mean that I haven't been received well, but it just means that oftentimes I've gone and I've presented messages like this, and there'd be some degree of resistance. For example, I'll never forget this experience as long as I live. Last year, when I was in Los Angeles, I was singing the song that I channeled called Peace, which is exactly what you would expect it to be. It's a song about peace, right? Again, very universal. But the way that I can describe what I'm speaking to here is that someone overhearing this song at that time, passing through the studio that I was working in, literally turned to the guy that owned the space and said, "What is this, freaking kumbaya?" With this tone of disdain for the very notion of singing about peace. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? There's been a kind of collective there's been a collective resistance to things that are universal, true, and pure for a very long time, and that veil is being lifted right now. And in the collective, there's actually an alignment now with the messages such as these around things like harmony and freedom and peace. And that's freaking beautiful. But I'm saying for myself, and this is one of the reasons why I have not felt a sense of belonging or a sense of home for a vast majority of my life, it's that I'm someone as well who has been out of sync with or out of phase with time. Now, time is I can spend hours talking about the nature of time so as to adequately convey what I'm speaking to here, but this isn't the video for that. I'll do that in another video. Suffice it to say, I've felt out of sync with time, and I now understand that in part to be a quality belonging to my neurodiverse and autistic makeup. But I've long experienced that out of syncness with time as, again, the ability to receive and or channel things that actually are not aligning with the collective consciousness in the moment that I received them. And for a while, I didn't understand that there was a lag time, if you will. I didn't understand that the things that I was receiving, that it would take a while for there to sort of be a fertile moment for those things to bloom in the external reality. And I spent a lot of time feeling frustrated about this, like not understanding why I would present these things knowing that they came from a very deep rooted, true, pure space, knowing that they came through with a lot of power, feeling a lot of conviction around these things, but then them not quite landing. All of this to say, what I'm speaking to here is the fact that when I was watching the Democratic National Convention and I was hearing the messages that were being put forth by Kamala Harris and those supporting her in her campaign, but I was also feeling and seeing and hearing the degree of excitement and the degree of joy and the degree of passion which was being reflected by those who were witnessing it in the audience. I felt a sense of things finally clicking together for myself relative to my own purpose and for where the world is, where the external world is, and what's being reflected, and where there is now space for what there was not space for previously. And it was the first time that I ever experienced the things that I value and believe in being reflected to me as being American, as being patriotic. And the thing of it is that what I've really been enjoying about what I've witnessed since that moment of the convention has been hearing speakers like not only Kamala Harris, but even AOC, right? Bringing up this idea of how it's e pluribus unum, right? And what this means. Or, again, how this idea of the land of the free and the home of the brave. I never connected to any sort of real sincere feeling in any of these words prior to this point. They all just seemed like phrases, like cliches, like things that we just say but that don't really have any meaning, or that aren't really demonstrated or embodied anywhere. And I'm actually seeing those things being embodied now. I'm actually feeling a degree of sincerity and sentiment in this. It's the first time that I really truly feel a sense of belonging here in this country and in this idea of America. And that, truthfully, has been one of the greatest surprises of my life, I'll be honest. I feel really excited about that because at the end of the day, in having received all of this stuff and the way in which the political climate and the condition of the external, the condition of the collective consciousness, right, and what I've observed, I was gearing up for a reality within which I would need to utilize these messages, these collectively universal messages of love and peace and unity and hope, as, in a sense, ammunition to fire against forces that are resistant to it. And right now, this is that moment, but it's not, by my perception, going to be a suspended moment of years on end of a fight, of a drag-out fight. That is, if we vote in alignment with these values. And I see and believe wholeheartedly that Kamala Harris is the candidate that is aligned with these values. What I was starting to feel and experience when I was watching that Democratic National Convention was a sense of hope, and was the feeling of, wow, I don't actually need to anticipate years of fighting against forces that are resistant to these universally held, pure themes of love and truth and freedom and peace. Because with the right person as a figurehead for what it is that this country values, my messaging and what I've received and what I'm creating and what my purpose is actually in alignment. And thus, it's the difference between going against the stream or adding to that stream so that it's as powerful as it possibly can be. This is where I see us at as a nation. We have this choice to vote in alignment with the stream or to vote for what's in resistance to it. Though I understand that those that would choose to vote in the other way don't see it in this way. The last thing I want to say is this. Another reason why it's been difficult for me to connect to a feeling of belonging for most of my life is because of the relationship that I've had to gender and to my own body. And I know now that, in part, what I was feeling resistance to was the gendered stereotypes. Because even in presenting in this way, I still don't feel any particular resonance with gendered stereotypes. It doesn't matter if those gendered stereotypes are associated with femininity or masculinity. Just the idea of gendered stereotypes is very boring, very static. It's freaking boring. It's uninspiring. But I also wasn't feeling at home in my own body. And the body this is our home vessel, for better or worse. And I've not even felt at home in the sense that I've lived houseless for a lot of years of my life. And that's because it's in part how I'm meant to be showing up relative to my purpose, in that I feel called to travel places, so it hasn't made sense for me to have some rooted, settled house structure. But also, I'm just wanting to say two things. The first is that I've not once heard Kamala Harris speak directly with words to the transgender community, to those who are gender non-conforming or gender expansive, however you want to put it. There have been no words of what's the right word? Not affirmation, not consolation. In other words, I've heard her say things like, this is a country within which you should be able to love the people with who you love, stuff like this, right? So that's very clearly directed to the queer community in terms of sexuality. There have been no phrases that have been pointing directly to the trans community. On the one hand, there's a part of me that feels a little sad about that. On the other, there's a part of me that feels as though it's honestly a really smart political strategy, because this is literally one of the most divisive issues, if not the most divisive issue. Gender has a way of really, really, really stirring some shit up. And frankly, I feel too strongly about her succeeding for me to even want for myself to hear some sort of narrative or some sort of conversation relative to gender. And also because, frankly, I don't think the space of the political campaign for presidency is the space for this conversation, because it's so nuanced. There are so many layers. It can't be summed up in a short little blurb. It can't. This is where I think society as a whole has gone terribly, terribly wrong. So let's put that aside. What I do want to say, though, is that what I have heard her express have been sentiments around, although in this case it's been more so geared towards women or those for whom there is the concern of becoming pregnant and whether or not they can have an abortion, having the right to make decisions about one's own body. To me, that is something that I feel ties into the choices that I've made relative to transition and gender expression, and I see those as being the seeds that are there, that are aligned with what it is that I care about relative to this issue, and that is enough for me. This is why I'm not ultimately taking the lack of an explicit mention of this topic to be a dismissal of it. I don't think so. The second thing I want to say is that I've heard Kamala Harris speak specifically and repeatedly to this notion of home, and in particular housing. And I forget which source it was, what I was watching or listening to, but she spoke specifically to the notion of home as being about safety and about this being a basic human right. And she even put it in the context of this safety, this basic human right, being foundational and fundamental to the well-being and thus the efficiency of society and of society's peoples. This is so true, because the fact of the matter is that another reason why I've experienced housing insecurity has been as someone who is neurodiverse. Though I've held jobs throughout my life, and though I've succeeded at all of those jobs, there's only been small windows of time for which I've been able to hold those jobs while in conjunction holding the other things that I need to hold to honor myself as a neurodiverse human being and my needs thus. but and also to honor my purpose and how that ties into my makeup. I've not been able to hold both of these things in a way which has equated to enough financial security to have my own housing structure, even if that's my own vehicle. And the fact of her speaking to these themes, but in this deeper way, it speaks right to my heart and soul, because the thing that's driven me the most crazy about all of this, about the housing insecurity, has been the frustration I've felt relative to my own efficiency, relative to how useful I can be in terms of being of service through my creative output, through my creative expression for those beyond myself. And thus to feel the inner satisfaction for myself of being of service in this way. All this to say, I feel as though I would be further along, if you will, in some of my pursuits if there weren't large stretches of time where I was navigating the instability of not having solid housing, not having solid containment. And the fact of her speaking words directly to this issue is another reason for which I am experiencing at this time a sense of belonging to this country. And these things are so important to me. This is ultimately so important to me. And I mean, there's still so much more that I can say through the lens of astrology relative to all this, but maybe I'll save that for another video, because I'm sure this is long enough. I would love to hear from those who, like myself, are maybe for the first time ever experiencing some sense of belonging or some sense of a connection to this idea of being American or what it means to be American. I'd feel really fascinated, really interested in hearing stories like that, if those of you out there are resonating with the same thing. Okay. Thank you for tuning in.